The next item on our agenda, also under Finance and Operations, is with regard to the use of polystyrene in the food services program. Citizen petitioners had recently requested that an article be placed on the annual town meeting warrant, which would prohibit the dispensing of prepared food in disposable food service containers made from expanded polystyrene. Mr. Collins and Ms. Beth Nichols, who's our Director of Food Services, gave a presentation to the committee a few weeks back addressing the potential impact of the passage that warrant article might have had on SBS. The petitioners were also invited to make a presentation to the school committee, and we further held a public hearing on the topic. The committee at the time did not feel taking a position on the warrant article was appropriate. The warrant article was not approved at the annual town meeting. We did have a memo request from Mrs. Fritz that the committee discuss the issue and provide some guidance to the administration regarding steps we might like to take going forward. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Fritz to kick off the discussion and talk about what we might like to do here.
I think when the students came and presented to us prior to town meeting, we did talk about if the ban was not approved at town meeting, that we would want to take a look at more, not just styrofoam, but this whole sustainable issue, looking at ways of doing things maybe differently. So now that the ban didn't pass, I think as a committee we should take a look at the styrofoam issue. And I'm not quite sure exactly the best way to do that. Maybe that's more in a workshop. And when we talk about sustainability, we can kind of put that more into a policy subcommittee as a broader overview.
Colleagues, further comments?
So I like the idea of doing this. I think that although I was not in favor of that particular item passing at the town meeting, it was because I was not convinced that it had been thoroughly investigated, that we had looked at all of the options, the consequences of the options, any potential unintended consequences. I thought that it needed a lot more investigation and for us to sound out the costs and benefits of every alternative. And I think this would make a nice summer project for the school committee. I think we ought to do that and basically move towards the most sustainable alternative that serves the school district and the community.
Excellent. Mr. Wensky.
I agree. I think it's a worthwhile exercise. I think we've seen some other kind of chain restaurants take the steps to gradually reduce their styrofoam footprint, if you will. So I think it's worthwhile to look at it as a committee to see how we can act.
And I think it should be measured approach. We can't just jump in and say this is bad or this is good, because we don't know.
Right.
We have to look at what is out there, what resources are we going to have, is it going to be a cost, how do we pass that on to consumers, do we not pass it on? So I think there's a lot to look at as opposed to just like, let's do this and this is the best course of action. It's better to explore it first.
Mrs. Gonzalo.
But I like the idea of, if it goes to a policy subcommittee, of keeping it broad and having it be overarching in terms of sustainability instead of a single topic issue. I support that idea, and perhaps the workshop for kind of guidance around what we're going to do.
What I visualize, can I
go ahead?
What I visualize here is that we get into meticulous detail regarding this particular problem, and as a result of that, we develop a framework for investigation that can be generalized to other problems. So we sort of start with a specific problem, and then from that experience find out what framework serves us best in addressing problems going forward.
I see two sort of related themes of this discussion, and let me first say, as someone who was in favor of the warrant article, and I do favor this committee taking action, I see the issue of polystyrene and what our approach to that is, but also the question of whether or not we as a committee might want to explore the development of a policy with regard to sustainability. As Mr. Collins noted eloquently during his presentation to us, we are not environmental experts. Shrewsbury Public Schools doesn't staff environmental experts to handle purchasing or things of that nature, but I do know that we as a committee value sustainability. That's a value we want to teach our students, so I do think it is worth exploring in a broader sense. What are our values with regard to this topic, and in the future, how might we or how might the district approach questions such as this? particular issue certainly generated a lot of attention by being a town meeting, but it certainly wasn't the first time somebody approached the school committee or the department with a concern or a question about sustainability, and it certainly won't be the last. And so I think in addition to the question of polystyrene, it's worth this committee potentially exploring how we as a district and as a committee address these topics. So I personally would favor an approach that maybe we take a workshop that we can delve specifically at the issue of polystyrene, but as a policy subcommittee, which is of course Mrs. Gonzalo and myself, we consider some language, or we consider what might or might not be appropriate for the committee to look at from a broader policy perspective. Dr. Sawyer or Mr. Collins, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to the discussion at this point.
No, I think it's helpful to, I think it's always wise not to try to develop policy around one narrow issue, but I think a policy that looks more broadly at that whole idea could serve the district well, and I'm interested in how that could evolve in terms of addressing the specific issue that was raised, because I'm sure it'll come back again in some form, so I think doing some additional work to determine where we might go with it. In light of the work that was done this spring, I know Mr. Collins has continued to work with Ms. Nichols and Food Services relative to just continue to gather information to be able to inform kind of how we might be able to go forward in the future. But maybe Mr. Collins can speak to a couple of those items as well.
Sure, and I think this is a topic that from food service to our own teachers and paraprofessionals, administrators, we're very interested in generally. Some specific things that that have kind of emerged out of this more recent discussion. For example, in talking with Mrs. Nichols, this whole idea, and these are very specific to this topic and very specific unto themselves. But and I know you're talking about a broader way to approach these things. But just as an example, she thinks that the use of polystyrene straws is really no longer necessary, in our school department. We're using plastic milk containers, and students, most students typically just drink out of the container, and a straw is not necessary. So, the elimination of a product like that has polystyrene in it, she thinks that next year we can just use up our stock and eliminate that. She has looked at and kind of piloted, if you will, or tested out some non-styrene utensils. And the con of that has been typically that they've been in the past very poor quality. Those are the kind that you put into like a piece of chicken or something like that, and they kind of just bend or break, and they don't function.
Right.
But now, of course, the marketplace, the industry is responding and providing more sturdy and usable products. So she thinks we can probably substitute at no additional cost for utensils, eliminating styrene utensils with non-styrene utensils. I did mention that we would, we do need and would get some outside help. And this is just coincidental to tonight's meeting, but tomorrow is the day that she's walking around with a dishwasher vendor to survey our schools, to have them, give us some of their assessment and evaluation about the feasibility and the cost relative to installing dishwashers. So we'll gather all that information as well, and that will require, again, I think some other probably additional assistance around, measurement of water, impact of use of chemicals, cost of chemicals, and kind of have a total approach to this, not just looking at some cost factors and not others. So those are the things that kind of emerged as a result of this most recent conversation. And I do think it is, again, a topic that we're all very interested in. I also, and this is my own personal belief, and I know Mr. Winsky just mentioned some of the national providers. I mean, we came back from Dr. Soren and I came back with Mr. Mizikar from MSBA a week ago, whatever. We stopped at Chipotle, and we had the compostable bowl, right, and environmentally friendly bowl. And so, part of our meal price included that bowl. There's no third-party funding here. We as consumers all pay for the sustainable, the ways to sustain our environment in the future. There's a cost to many of these things, and customers pay for. We all pay for these things, and so the commentary around if we were forced to use a substitute tray and there's an additional cost, was not meant to be, threatening or punitive or whatever. That's just the way business works. We're an enterprise fund, and if that's what the committee decides, then that's not a problem at all. We'll do that, and it just happens to come at some additional cost. So, anyway, those are the things that she has undertaken, and we'll continue to look at and evaluate with respect to the food service operation.
Thank you for those remarks, and thank you to you and Ms. Nichols and your team for your continued vigilance. I know obviously it's the list of things that you're required to purchase for the operations of our schools is not small, and we appreciate the time that you've put into this particular topic. Colleagues, is there consensus on the approach we've been discussing with regard to the potential use of a workshop to address the question of polystyrene and having the policy subcommittee examine sustainability in a broader sense?
Yes. Sounds fine. Would we want members outside of the school committee to participate in this workshop?
That could certainly be a possibility. I think we probably would determine the specifics around the workshop after getting it scheduled, but I think that certainly would be a possibility, and I would say I would further, while I'll work with the superintendent to get that scheduled, I would encourage members outside of that setting to do your own research and first and foremost decide what questions you feel you need addressed for your own benefit, and do your own research so we can have as reflective and involved discussion as possible. And certainly there's nothing to preclude further discussion beyond a single workshop if that should become necessary. So if there's consensus that that's how the committee would like to proceed, I think that that's how we'll go. Anything further on this topic tonight?
Do you need a motion around?
I don't think we need a vote to
Okay.
refer to. If somebody would like to make a motion, you're welcome to
Oh,
do
we don't
so,
need
but I
it.
don't think
Okay.
a vote is required for either of those courses of action. So without anything further on